What you're saying reminds me of what you were just saying earlier about this kind of viral politics rather than political politics.
Hmm.
It seems like both parties are very appealing to their viewer base and, as you mentioned, calcifying. I guess I'm curious, is there anything we can do as people that want to fight against propaganda to decalcify it? Or are we kind of stuck because the people in power are doing what the people in power do?
There is something we can do, and one thing to do is try to understand the other side. I mean, I think if you look at the last election with the Democrats, the entertaining thing, it's not entertaining. The parties have flipped. The Democrats used to be the party of the working class. The Republicans are now the party of the working class. So this is a remarkable switch in American politics. And part of it is that I think, Democrats lost touch talking to people who they like themselves. There's a classic story. The New Yorker magazine, great magazine, by the way, had a film critic, Pauline Kael, and there's a famous quotation from Pauline Kael, who after Nixon was elected, she couldn't believe that Nixon was elected because nobody she knew voted for Nixon. Well, guess what? She was a New York intellectual, and everybody she knew was Democratic. Nobody she knew would vote for Nixon. Well, the same is true, I think, of a lot of Democrats. They had their inner circle, and they all agreed with each other. They didn't know anybody. They couldn't imagine why anyone would vote for Trump. Well, a lot of people, I know some who didn't like Trump very much, but they said, look, his policies are simply going to be better for the country than those of Kamala Harris. And, you can agree or disagree, but the point is they had rational arguments about why they would prefer one set of policies over to the other. But the point is, a lot of Democrats could not understand how that could be. It was incomprehensible that anyone could not be a firm proponent of their point of view. Well, where that leads me is, going back to my earlier point, pay attention to the other side. Try to understand why. If you go up to someone who supports Trump and says, this guy is a philandering, money-loving crook, guess what? This isn't going to work. They're going to look at you and say, yeah, you're one of them, stupid, brainwashed sheeple people, okay? That doesn't make the job any easier of conversation. But if you can actually have a conversation with someone who disagrees with you without beginning by giving the impression, boy, are you an idiot, you're a lot more likely to get somewhere. Or you're more likely, I wouldn't say a lot more likely, but you're more likely to get somewhere.
Do you feel like the internet has increased the divisiveness, or do you feel like this has been more of a decision-based thing? Like, do you think that various parties decided to kind of turtle up, or do you think that the internet, through pushing the extremes rather than the middle of the road, like your earlier example, the town Nazis quiet, all the town Nazis together are a force on the internet to harass people?
I think it's basically a function of the increasing divisiveness. As I said in the past, the major media had to pick kind of there were right and left, but there was a broad inner spectrum, and people got information which was generally somewhere around the center of what could be done, okay? If the New York Times or had turned totally Marxist, they would have lost readers. If the Washington Post became totally Nazi in its views, it would lose readers. So for economic as well as other reasons, the media had to appeal to a broad audience. But what happens now is that the internet makes it possible to find your group and your group only. So that increases the polarization, and it makes the situation a great deal worse than it ever was. And there isn't much of an easy solution to that. We're not going to abolish the internet, or we're not going to insist that you hire an editor to go over everything that you produce before it goes live. It's not going to happen. So there's not an easy way out of this mess.
Some people say the solution is to get off the internet, and you just mentioned that that's not going to happen, right? The internet's here to stay. I guess I'm curious if you think this is a more permanent kind of political dynamic, this increasing divisiveness, this increasing silos of information where, you believe your thing, you're always right, you're never on the outside. Do you think this is more of a permanent thing, or are there ways to have access to infinite information and not get lost in the ocean? Does that make sense? I'm trying to...
Yeah, well, I think, it's consistent with what I said earlier. It's not that the internet is in its totality a bad thing, but its effect on our attitudes is a bad thing. And there are solutions, but most people won't use them. As I said, I like Facebook, not because I want to read what some yokel thinks about Elon Musk, but because I like to know what my friends are doing. And so if anything is too political, I kind of mute it on Facebook. In the same way, the worst possible place to get information about international affairs as Facebook or Twitter or any of the social media, okay? But on the other hand, fairly cheaply, you can subscribe to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, National Review, the Atlantic. These things relatively, and reading those on the internet is fine because, again, they've got editors. They'll give you a balanced perspective. You know, it may be to the right or the left. The point is there are still editors. Now, the problem is that people aren't going to do that. If you look back to Hitler, you know, if you were to summarize Hitler's points of propaganda, he said, you know, basically propaganda had to be simple. It had to be black and white. It had to be emotional. Well, the internet is made to order for that, okay? Because you see the Twitter post, and it's simple. It's a few sentences, or, you know, it's emotional. This terrible thing has happened. The country is being ruined. Okay, you've got that. Repeat it over and over again, and all the help are repeating it over and over again. Okay, it's black and white, total good and total evil. And that can be done in a few sentences or a few images. It's simple. On the other hand, to read a lead article in the Atlantic takes time, takes effort. And so if people were to do that, it'd be great, but most people aren't going to do it. They want certainty. They want to be mad. Those kinds of things. So the basic principles of propaganda are ideally suited for the internet.